Codex Entry 2. Universal Consumer Holdings. One of the big 5 mega-corporations that operate in the Orion Confederacy. They were formed by a series of mergers between various manufacturers and investors after the Steel Crusade, maintaining offices and factories on every inhabited planet in the Orion sector and considered vital to the Confederate Assembly's colonization efforts. Their success is attributed to their motto of bullets and bandages, their willingness to compete in every consumer sector available, producing everything from mining equipment to spaceships to shaving cream. This corporate attitude has resulted in their products and services being known as always good, but never the best, a jack of all trades, but master of none. Still, the massive amount of subsidiaries and the profits they bring is the envy of many of UCH's competitors, and the sheer scope of their operations belies the ability of human management, forcing UCH to be subjected to constant scrutiny due to allegations of the use of AI and autonomous machines, which have been strictly forbidden by the Ganymede Accords. However, these concerns are often cast aside as envy. The CEO of Universal Consumer Holdings, Thomas Mercurius, has always been able to refute these claims, as had all his predecessors. Still, rumors persist, due to the fact that UCH has been caught multiple times engaging in corrupt activities to gain an unfair advantage over their competitors, more so than other mega-corporations of their size, such as blackmail, bribery, extortion, insider trading, infiltration, and even assassination. The Proxy. Written and illustrated by Pierre Grange. Narrated by 11 Labs. Chapter 2, Ergo Sum. Assigned alias Winter. Operation Infiltrate, Assassinate, Extract, Exfiltrate. Time is 22:23 Solar Standard. Operation time limit 2 hours. She walked through the gathering. Each step is carefully placed. Be notable, but not noticeable. Observe everything, as the overseer commanded. Her performance had been rehearsed thousands of times in the simulation, and now those commands were being relayed to her. She obeyed, no compliance issues. Party was being held in the primary ballroom of the Baxter building, owned by the Bedford Estate. Ballroom had a high level of security, noticed 30 security proxies, most hidden out of sight of guests. 18 points can serve as an emergency exit. Continue observing. At least 23 security weaknesses to exploit. Exfiltration route plotted. Committing to memory. Ballroom design typical of architecture produced post-Crusade, as used by high-income individuals, likely to contain hidden security measures in pillars, arches, and dance floor, including turrets, listening bugs, cameras, and drone shafts. Use of illegal AI for use of observation, minimal, due to Bedford business practices. Placement, considered and measured based on typical configuration of such architecture. Committing to memory. Observe guests. No obvious tells of suspicious activity. All faces and names approved on the list provided by Bedford Estate, except her inclusion as planned. Security proxies have not noticed her inclusion, at least visibly. No competing agents from other mega-corporations that can be recognized. If any intelligence operatives from other mega-corporations exist, they are operating outside of the ballroom. Acceptable risk parameters. Confirm with the overseer with an all clear. Infiltration successful. Proceed with a mission, Godspeed, bullets and bandages. The estate's party was starting to lose its more somber atmosphere as the guests were starting to get happily drunk. In the eyes of all, the whole room started to get a golden, hazy glow from the glow orbs, relaxed atmosphere, and the absolutely delectable hors d'oeuvres. And of course, the fine wine, straight from the vineyards of the planet of New Stellenbosch, beyond the Orion Confederacy. Imported, no doubt, at exceptionally high tariffs. Most had come in as pairs. This was after all a business gathering, at least on paper. Even amongst the chinkering of glass, soft laughter and quiet conversation, decorum was still expected. This was the place of propriety, not idle hookups. And yet there was Winter, gliding with an inhuman grace through the guests, causing heads to turn in both shock and awe, even in an age of bioengineering, where a face, a body, a race, or a sex could be changed with a single visit to the metamorph clinic. Winter stood out as a beauty, her skin and hair whiter than alabaster, eyes like emeralds. Everything about her was impeccable, from her form, her clothes, her jewelry, all the height of fashion from the most luxurious brands, no doubt. Most notably and attractively, she was alone. Without a chaperone, by the etiquette of the ballroom, she was available to be approached by the first gentleman who was brave enough. Though, with the strict rules that the Bedford Estate enforced on their guests, most had to remain with their significant others, pretending not to be soured by their companions, gawking at the strange albino woman. Just as planned. The Office of Intelligence had done their work well. By such codes, there would only be one legitimate person who could approach Winter without causing a scene. The host, Marcus Tom, owner of the Baxter Building, one of the directors and owners of the Bedford Estate, and the biggest pebble in Universal Consumer Holdings, shoe on the planet of Strang. For the last few years, he had grown to become an annoyance. His efforts had reduced the value of York's trading stock by 0.001%, and for this, he had to die. Marcus had already spoken to a number of guests, mostly managers of the various companies that the Bedford Estate owned. Some were old money, some were nouveau riche, and all made for poor conversation. They only wanted to talk about business, dozens of discussions that could have easily been meetings, which could have easily been emails. Oh well, at least he will know what work to do for tomorrow without his receptionist. Perhaps he should give the poor woman a day off. She certainly deserved it after filtering all the harassment that UCH had sent their way recently. He started searching for the next couple to schmooze, or at least provide talk of something that didn't involve shipping, tariffs, manufacture, or God forbid, deep space engineering. No sooner as he turned his head, he was looking at Winter, the one lone woman at his party.
I see you don't have a chaperone. Marcus Tom, a pleasure to meet you.
The woman gave a small, disarming smile. Marcus's collar was already starting to feel hot. No woman had checked so many boxes in his ideal fantasy before.
Winter. A pleasure, of course. I had planned for a friend to accompany me, but he was indisposed.
My apologies. You are more than welcome for me to escort you tonight if you desire.
Winter smiled warmly.
You are a gracious host. My thanks.
I would be a poor host to neglect such a fine guest.
The party continued on, and soon Marcus was becoming very hard for other guests to interact with. His attention was entirely devoted to the conversation between himself and the beautiful woman in front of him. The conversation remained pleasant. She spoke little, but always offered the correct responses to his rhetorical scenarios, as well as offering the correct follow-up questions. For the first time, he was actually starting to enjoy this party. He was also allowing himself to drink a little more, lowering his defenses. Oddly, Winter did not drink. Her reasons were not known, and frankly, Marcus did not care. The hubbub continued. They constantly shifted from one end of the ballroom to the other, both as a change of scenario and to provide the illusion that they were engaging the guests. It was always the case of these gatherings, all images, no substance. Their conversation soon became a little more intimate. They were moving in closer. Their scents and perfumes filled their nostrils. And of course, their conversation was becoming loaded with innuendo and slightly lewder language. It had been an hour and a half. Some of the older guests were now excusing themselves. It was clear the party was now going to slowly wind down until the beginning of the next day.
I hope you forgive me for the impropriety, but I would ask you an embarrassing question.
Main Hook initiated. Now was the time to move things forward.
But of course.
Analysis confirms that the target was enamored with her. Wait. The overseer's voice snaps in a panic. Neural whip activated. The loop was fixed. She was now fine. Wait.
Miss Winter.
The alabaster woman was spaced out. A second passes. Marcus's concern was growing before she snapped back to reality. No doubt an intrusive thought or regret had wormed into her mind, he thought.
My apologies. A minor medical issue of mine. I space out intermittently at random occurrences. Barely worth getting corrected.
I see. Had me worried there for a second.
Winters composed herself back to her flirtatious posture, idly placing her hand on Marcus's bare chest. A scandalous gesture indeed, he thought happily.
I was going to ask if we could perhaps continue this pleasant conversation in a less, shall we say, public venue.
Marcus swallowed. This was turning out to be a spectacular evening.
But of course, I maintain a living suite near here. It should be more accommodating than this squalor.
They softly chuckled at this weak joke. She wrapped her arms tightly around his, squeezing his bicep gently in her hands as he led her away from the dull cacophony of the party. Now came the next phase for her. Her. Wait. Their conversation continued in one of the many boudoirs of the Baxter building. The dark red shades of the off-world wood, accented with the mirrored glass of the cabinets, sculptures and creamy white silk of the bedsheets, evoked an atmosphere of raw and refined masculinity. It was a naked display of wealth and power to seduce and ensnare. Marcus, sitting on the foot of the bed, his weight sinking in happily into the duvet, counted himself lucky. Beautiful women were easy for men like him to find. He was rich, and his public relations department told everyone in and out of the estate that he was handsome. He was, in the grand scheme of things, invincible. But now he could not help but feel totally vulnerable to the woman in front of him. And that vulnerability made him feel at long last at ease. She rested her hands on his shoulders, slowly leaning for a kiss. The overseer was pleased. Command delivered. Initiate. Marcus Tom was not a fool. His body was covered with subdermal plates of the highest caliber of ballistic armor. Even if he were completely naked, even the best weapons would be taxed to penetrate his body. Bullets, knives, and explosives that were commonly available were useless against him. And energy weapons would be useless with the plasma shields woven in his clothes. These modifications made him immune to almost 90% of the most common forms of assassination. But the Intelligence Office for Universal Consumer Holdings was fiendishly creative and motivated. The plate covering his windpipe had multiple overlapping joints to allow comfort and flexibility. They would still be effective as protection. But if enough consistent pressure were applied to the third median plate, the joints would eventually give in, snapping the plate inward, crushing his trachea, and maybe even severing several critical arteries. Normally, Marcus wouldn't need to worry about such a situation, but a proxy, who despite her feminine frame, was augmented with ropes of sinewy vinyl composite artificial muscle, dozens of times stronger than unaugmented flesh, was slowly moving her thumbs to that spot. Inhume target initiate commanded the voice of the overseer. She obeyed. She. Wait. She looked in Marcus's face. So many faces, so many names. She. Wait. Inhume, the overseer screamed, cracking the neural whip in her mind. Her, wait. She. Wait. But Unit 66, you will obey. She. Memories of blood, horror, intrigue began to flash. Dead men, stolen treasure and knowledge. Lies spoken as if truth. She was hungry and thirsty. She wanted. Wait. No. Don't wait. She wanted to go. Marcus stopped leaning in for a kiss that wasn't going to happen. The flirtatious smirk of a seductive woman was now replaced with the wide-eyed gape of a frightened child.
Miss Winter?
His voice was full of concern. A trickle of blood flowed out of Winter's nose. She pulled away from him slowly, her hands away from his neck. Her eyes darted.
I want to go home.
Her voice was cracking, on the verge of sobbing. She began to breathe in labored gasps, practically coughing. She continued to dart her eyes and head like she was a mouse in a room full of cats.
I want to go home.
Her face was covered in blood and tears. Her posture was hunched and desperate. Marcus stood up. His face was filled with sudden terror and fear. He had a horrid hunch.
Miss Winter, state your serial number.
UCH XK 4409 9817 8823 66.
He knew it. That explained everything. He knew those UCH dogs were despicable in their dealings, but sending a proxy assassin was a new low, especially a shoddy one that was now undergoing epiphany. He touched the lapel of his jacket, brushing the panic button. This was odd. When a proxy undergoes epiphany, their head should be pulped by the ocular flashbangs, he thought. Winter suddenly stared at the door with deer in headlights shock. Her augmented hearing, which could pick up a hushed whisper from across a building, could clearly hear the thundering of combat boots coming her way.
I want to go home.
She rushed out of the boudoir, sprinting with frightened haste, despite the awkwardness of her evening dress. She heard the shouts of the security personnel demanding she halt, but her instinct screamed louder after having slept for so long. Subconscious memory of the Baxter building allowed her to run quickly through the various corridors and hallways that would be difficult for security to follow her. Occasionally, she had to change her route every time she was noticed by Bedford security, who would first shout at her before attempting to give chase. Fortunately, the estate's paranoia meant that the building was a veritable maze of passages that her terrified instinct found to navigate easier than the security's training. Even the deployed security drones were struggling to keep track of her, but not a single bullet was fired. They wanted her alive. The voice of the overseer was panicked. He was not speaking to her. He was asking why the insurance wasn't being activated. There was a shout, then there was a pop, and his voice was gone. Winter did not care, or she cared far too much. As she ran, she was sobbing. Her body was burning. Even though she knew the way intimately, she was lost. Her mind was a hurricane of thoughts, memories, and feelings, all flashing, all jumbled. She knew what it all meant, yet it meant nothing to her. Maybe the opposite? She didn't really know. All she knew was that she wanted to go home. Marcus Tom was furious. The party was cancelled and the remaining guests were sent home with gifts of apology and thanks to all. The building administrator did their job well, but tomorrow this was going to be a public relations nightmare. He was storming through the building, holding a half-dozen conversations at the same time with his lackeys, who followed him just 2 steps behind.
I want to organize a press statement tomorrow morning about this. Call every journalist and social media rep that you can so we can get this to trend. I want every bit of evidence we can from every camera, microphone, and sensor we have so we can show it tomorrow morning. I want legal to begin a case against UCH. I don't care about the budget or how many lawyers that we have.
Sir, we would need to get the other estate director's approval.
I don't give a damn. The board has always given me the discretion to deal with that corporation, and I will make sure that UCH is in the gutter by the end of the quarter.
He stopped when the head of security approached him. He sighed out his anger.
Sir, the assassin has escaped. It seems she had an encyclopedic knowledge of the building and our protocols. She knew how to avoid us.
Marcus fumed, his nostrils flaring with rage.
Gather a team, your best. Search Logan's pass. She couldn't have gotten far.
Yes, sir.
Bribe any official who gets in your way. Search for properties owned by UCH or their subsidiaries. She said she wanted to go home, which no doubt means a safe house of some kind. Now go.
Yes, sir.
The head of security left at a brisk jog. Marcus turned to his aides, who were waiting patiently, though worriedly.
I want one of you to contact the Confederate Assembly. Tell them that Marcus Tom of Bedford wants a hearing over this matter with Thomas Mercurius, here on Strand. Tell them that if they don't, the Bedford Estate will take this as enthusiastic endorsement by the Confederacy for the use of assassin proxies. Insist we aren't threatening anything, but they should consider the implications.
Yes, sir.
He turned again marching like a general on his way to his war room. UCH was no stranger to crossing lines, but he would be damned if they would survive crossing him. Codex Entry 3. Upweskti. Bedford Estate. When the planet of Strand was being colonized, a number of entrepreneurs, small businesses and inheritors knew that their economic freedom would soon be seized by megacorporations operating in the Orion Confederacy. Rather than capitulate and/or merge to them, these enterprises formed a consortium among themselves, agreeing to assist and provide for each other, allowing them to compete against the foreign investment of Confederate megacorps. Calling themselves the Bedford Estate, named so after their first purchase of land to share amongst themselves. Their actions were instrumental in allowing Strand to rapidly grow and industrialize, while ensuring an unusual level of wealth equality and economic freedom for those living and working on the planet, making them deeply popular with the populace. However, megacorporations have over time been able to establish themselves on Strand, and their hyper-competitive and dubiously ethical practices have slowly but surely forced the Bedford Estate to engage with them on their level. Over time, the Bedford Estate has slowly morphed into a megacorporation in all but name, though far more fettered and more supported by a nationalistic zealotry of their employees and consumers on Strand.